045 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
Morning, Jeff. 3 minutes after 8 on Wednesday, the 27th of August. Later in the show, we will return to that horrific case in Rotherham, the 1,400 victims effectively ignored, officials failing to stop grooming by gangs. We'll give you full details and return to that story. Also in this hour, if you've used them, you need to be aware of the health concerns regarding e-cigarettes. There is a growing now sense of opinion, body of opinion, I should say, medical thought, that they could be just as dangerous as the regular or normal cigarettes. That's later in this hour. But let's start this hour, and I've mentioned a couple of times, we're fortunate enough, and it's always good to have Met Police Commissioner Sir Bernard Hogan-Howe in the studio, and he's here, of course, to take your calls and answer your questions. But, Commissioner, you'll understand if I start by posing a question myself. One of your senior colleagues, Mark Rowley, saying we appeal to the public to help us identify aspiring terrorists. Exactly what is the situation with IS, with Islamic jihadists in this particular town at the moment, and what are you and your colleagues doing?
Oh, good morning, Nick.
Morning, Sir Bernard.
The thing that we're worried about is that so many people from Britain have gone to Syria, and we think potentially Iraq, because that borders can hardly be seen, to get involved in terrorism. That's a criminal offence. We know that some of these people have come back. We're talking hundreds who went, about 250 have come back. We think
how many hundreds went, do you think, Commissioner?
It's difficult to be precise, but we think towards at least 500 to 600 went. Now, the reason we're not precise is because we only know for certain the ones we know about. The people have travelled to Turkey, which is a crossing point into Syria, and they went on holiday allegedly. Unless we have intelligence that they went over the border, we can't be sure. So we say what we're sure of, which is over 500. So we're certainly talking hundreds. Some have come back. We've got to keep an eye on them. Obviously, they risk being militarised, and they're in a network of terrorists. They have committed a criminal offence. We interview all of them, and where we can, we charge. It's a worry because, obviously, we think 2/3 of them to 3/4 of them come from the London area. So that's quite a large number. The Met leads the National Counter-terrorism Network. So working with the rest of the units, we do our best to make sure that people in this country are kept safe.
Some politicians have suggested that they should have their passports effectively taken away from them. Where do you stand on that, Commissioner?
Well, certainly for us, I think anything that either stops them going or, frankly, stops them coming back is a good idea.
You support the idea?
Yeah, if in law it works, then I think we should do that. I mean, it seems to me it's a privilege to have a passport and be a citizen of this country. And if you're going to start fighting in another country on behalf of another state or against another state, it seems to me that you've made your choice about where you want to be. And that's a matter of law, and the politics are going to have to sort that out. The big things for us that we've talked about is that if we can get an assumption that when people have come back and have been to Syria, they've been involved in terrorism. If they can prove they haven't, then that's up to them. It's pretty hard sometimes for us to prove what they were doing in Syria. The state's failed. We can't talk to the police there very easily. I'm sure we could have good relationships, but they're in the middle of a war. So gathering evidence to put before a court in this country is quite hard. So we need all the help we can get in that area. And I know there's been more of a debate again about control orders. Control orders were here before. They were stopped because the threat was reduced, and quite properly it was seen as too intrusive to have that sort of control order. But I think these things have got to be considered when you've got the drumbeat changes, and it's clear that the drumbeat changed.
So you would urge perhaps the return of control orders?
Certainly something like it. I think,
What do you mean by like it, Commissioner?
Well, because the big thing on the control orders was, first of all, in the control order, if you were under a control order, you would be told where you could live. Under the new arrangements, then people they can be excluded from areas, but they aren't controlled into a certain area. Now, that puts quite a lot of responsibility on all the security services to monitor them. They can casually bump into someone in a shop, into a mosque, into wherever. And that's really hard if you've been placed in Carlisle, Swindon, Glasgow. So I think whether or not we could go back that far, I think is debatable, because the court started to strike them down. But I think when things change like they have over this last few weeks, and bearing in mind it changed so quickly. If you remember what happened in Iraq, in the space of a few days, probably a quarter of a country just disappeared. It went under the boots of these jihadists. Well, you've got to respond to that type of change. And our point is, if it went that so quickly the terrorists took charge, equally quickly it might be dispersed. And if that is the case, our concern is they come back to this country very quickly. So I think we've got, we've got a bit of planning time, but we've got to use it wisely.
I know I've asked you this before. How many police officers does it take to effectively monitor one suspect?
We don't talk about it in any great detail because you might imagine there are two problems
but
with
it's
that.
a team.
We
you're not going to get two blokes, are you?
I know, but exactly. We don't advertise our tactics. And secondly, if people know broadly how many people we got in counter-terrorism, and it takes
You've got
X,
enough money for this?
I think we're going to have to look at the resourcing of it, either within the Met or across the country. I know the Australians have just invested an awful lot of money in the same problem in their security services. This is a matter for government, but I think we're going to have to look at it.
Yeah, it's got to be tough to do. Lastly, do you know who the killer known as Jihadi John is, Commissioner?
No, we just said that we're making progress in that investigation. Of course, we're working with our partners in America, because this was an American citizen who was murdered by a British citizen, it appears. We don't know. We can only go on the speculation, and there's no clear evidence. But that's the fear in a war zone, and we've got to tie down where it happened. So first of all, we have to tie down who we think did it, where it happened, and then we can start talking about jurisdiction. But
it is still your belief, then, the man with the British accent was the murderer? Because there's this suggestion that the video... have you had sight of the video?
I've seen some of it. I've not seen the awful bits, and I don't think I need to, frankly, and I'd urge other people not to look at it. I think out of respect for the family, I think it should be avoided.
It goes to black, as they say in professional terms. The video goes to black, and then you just see the gruesome aftermath.
Yeah, but there has been some footage on the video on the internet of all of it, I think. So I think that's what we're asking people not to look at. And they may commit an offence, so we're just warning them of that. But in principle, the point that we're
how smart a tactic is that, Commissioner? Because people are going to view it.
Let me just finish the first bit, which is that in terms of who committed the crime, and it is a crime, we're investigating to try and find out. Obviously, there is a voiceover which everybody's heard, which sounds like a Brit and sounds like somebody from London. That's all the experts tell us. So we're investigating to see whether that's true. That investigation is making progress, but it's not straightforward. There's not a nameplate stuck on it. We are going to have to do quite a lot of work with various people to get to the bottom of it, but we will do, I'm sure.
And what was the thinking behind urging people, or even warning them, saying that you could be committing a crime if you viewed the video? Well, doesn't that just attract people to view it?
Well, there's that risk, but I'm not sure. I mean, after it had been splattered all over the news for 24 hours, I'm not sure. I think everybody knew about it. I think our point was twofold, really. One is, out of respect for the family, is it really the nicest thing to do? Why do you want to see somebody dealt with in such a way? I don't think that's a very human response. And as importantly, there is an offence from the Terrorism Act of distributing terrorist material. And we're trying to get over to people, all right, it may be an offence to look at it yourself, but it certainly could be a serious offence if you start to share it with someone else. And of course, terrorists survive. Terrorism is, the definition of terrorism is you use violence or the threat of violence for a political purpose. And the only way that works is when you communicate that to a wide population. That's what they're doing. It's terrible they killed a man, and that was a terrible event. That really wasn't what they're after, was it? They're after terrifying people and about getting their political point across. Well, if people are prepared to support them by sharing that video, that's probably not a very good idea. So therefore, we've been very clear what the law says and warning them of the consequences.
And lastly, before we come to the first call from you, Clayton, if anyone's listening to this who has any information about this man or indeed any others, what would you say to them, Commissioner?
Well, tell us. I know people might say, well, if it was a son, a brother, are people really going to tell us? Well, my point to them is, if you know someone who's going to Syria or Iraq, tell us now before they go. We have a chance of preventing them committing a crime or getting hurt or hurting somebody else. When they come back, they're at risk. There's just a number I'd like to share, 0800 789 321. That's 0800 789 321, which is the counter-terrorist hotline, or just our 101. And you get through to our control room, give us the information. We'll treat it confidentially. We're not going to tell the world that someone told us. That really would be really, really silly. We've got good systems for doing that. People do tell us when they're worried about a niece, a nephew, or whatever. Best chance of saving them, if you love them, and it's also the best chance of us preventing more terrorism in the future.
As you put your headphones on to take the calls, I'll repeat that number. It's 0800 789 321, or you ring 101, and it's all dealt in utter confidence. Clayton's in Forest Hill. You're through to the Commissioner. Go ahead, Clayton.
Good morning, all.
Good morning, Clayton.
Morning. Go ahead with your question, Clayton. Clayton, can you get your question out? We've lost Clayton. Darren's in Mill Hill. Darren, go ahead. You're through to the Commissioner. Go ahead, Darren.
Hi there. Good morning.
Morning, Darren.
Morning, Darren.
Hi. Thank you for taking my call. I'd like to ask, to what extent, if any, does religious sensitivity and political correctness gone mad hinder your counter-terrorist activities? And, as Commissioner, do you think that there is cross-party consensus on this issue, or do you think that there is some kind of security trade-off, depending on which party we all vote for? I mean, the reason I'm asking, I'm saying in light of recent events where you... Okay, I think you know where I'm coming from, so
yeah,
that's my...
I think I'm going to say yes and no to you, really. I think, yes, there is some sensitivity in the sense that, if you looked at the this ISIL group, they're associated with Islam, but they're about 0.01% of people who are Muslims. So that we are all sensitive to the fact that 99.9% of Muslims are good citizens of this country who want to keep safe and they want this country to succeed. So we don't want to condemn them. So in that sense, we're all sensitive to that. Christians don't really want to be condemned, and neither do Muslims. So in that sense, we are sensitive. In the sense, if people are committing offences, they're going to give money to terrorism, they're going to preach in the street. And I know Nick wrote about this within the last week. I think he's right. In the past, there's been too much sensitivity.
Oh, you read my column. Talking about Commissioner. I better be careful what I put in there, sir.
But what I would say is that, certainly under my watch, is that if we see this type of thing now, they will be shifted. We're not going to allow them to block the streets. They cannot preach hate. And it's very clear it has left a fertile ground for those who are wanting to abuse the privileges of a democracy.
With the benefit of hindsight, Commissioner, was that a mistake, just to watch on as people burnt poppies and ranted away with these sermons?
I always hesitate to judge the past, because someone will judge me eventually. So I'm not going to comment too much on that.
No, we judge you now, don't worry, we don't hang around.
Oh, no, they have been quite quick. But fundamentally, people shouldn't be allowed to block roads, shouldn't be allowed to preach hate, and they need to be stopped quickly. So you should find under my watch that will happen. But we've got to be wise about not dealing with everybody in the same way.
All right, Darren, quick response from you, then I'll move on. Quick one
Sure.
sentence.
I mean, what about the cross-party consensus? I mean, do you think that some parties are going to deal with this issue better than others, or?
Well, if you excuse me on this one, I'm going to take the fifth, because I'm not going to try and comment on any particular party. I think all the big parties want people to be kept safe. I have no doubt about that. They obviously sometimes have different views about the invasion of human rights. I understand that too. Well, that's for them to debate. And as a police officer, I'm always going to push to the nth degree to get the bad guys locked up. And sometimes people have to push back and say, hang on a minute, you've got to think about majority and what impact it's having on normal life. I understand that debate. It's not mine. I don't have to get involved in it. But I think on the whole, the big parties are responsible and want to get the right outcome, which is get the bad people locked up and keep the majority of us safe.
Thank you, Dan. Chris is in West Wickham. Go ahead, Chris.
Hi, as a survivor of child abuse myself, the biggest problem about speaking out is to want to be believed. All these poor kids in Rotherham, when they've spoken out and they've not been believed and there's been a massive cover-up, I know you're investigating it still, when is the society, the government, the police, everybody going to wake up to the scale of the child abuse problem, and when are we going to start being believed, and when is there going to be transparency on the whole issue?
Well, Chris, there's no doubt that historically people haven't listened to children. I hope they are listening better now, but obviously it's worrying what's happened in Rotherham, because even quite recently, some victims have been ignored, it appears, according to this report. So that is a worry. And what we know in the Met is that certainly over the last couple of years we've seen a 50% reduction in reporting of sexual offences. Now, a lot of that is historical. We have been criticised for putting lots of officers into historical investigations. Why are you going back so far? But you're explaining why it's important. It's important, sounds like, for you, obviously, and it's important for many victims. So we're doing our best to remedy things from the past. But, of course, different attitudes at the time. Nobody believed kids. Why would they believe a priest had attacked them, or a teacher, or a police officer at times? I think people just didn't believe children. I think now what they believe is it's more likely to be true than not.
There's a lot of pressure on the Police and Crime Commissioner in South Yorkshire, Sean Wright, Sir Bernard, to stand down, not least as he was also a councillor in charge of social services and children's welfare. Do you think he should go?
I'm not going to comment on that, because one, I've not read the report, and I don't know what it says about him in particular, so I think I'll leave that for South Yorkshire.
And also, it's the same force that's involved in Cliff Richard. What's your view on the what would seem to be work between the BBC and the police in orchestrating, if I can use that word, the arrival of the officers at Sir Cliff Richard's home?
Yeah, I can't quite follow the chronology of it. Every time I hear it, it seems to change a little. So I'm not able to judge it entirely. Clearly, South Yorkshire Police have felt under some pressure to allow the broadcasters to get involved, and the broadcasters clearly thought they got a good story and wanted to broadcast.
What would you do if that happened in the Met?
It's difficult to be precise, because we do take broadcasters.
I come to you with, right, I know you're all over, let's say Nick Ferrari. I know you're all over Nick Ferrari. I know you're going to knock his door down because you believe he's a paedophile. Can we work together? What would you say to the Met?
I think we want to work through that and find out how much you really knew, or how much you were trying to get us to confirm what you thought you knew. And we have to be very careful not to compromise the investigation. Now, to be fair, we do take broadcasters on some of our raids.
Yes.
You'll have seen it. So I can hardly say it never happens, but I think where you've got, in this case, it became a named individual, or at least it was eventually a named individual, you've got to be really careful. And I'm sure that's what they're unpicking at the moment.
Yes, it could compromise the investigation, couldn't it?
There's a risk of it. I mean, there's another argument, which, people have made to us. If you remember, journalists have been making the argument to the Met over the last 2 years, every time you arrest somebody who's of high public interest, you should tell us. And we say, well, they're not even charged, and they say, we don't care, you should tell us, because that will bring, as we've heard, Chris said, people come out from the past and now reassured they will come forward. So the argument is that you should release details about people who are not yet charged. And yet now there is a said, well, you shouldn't have, that South Yorkshire shouldn't have told the press. So I think that debate is not yet resolved. In fact, if you looked at The Guardian a week ago, they were saying they accepted there was quite a tension for broadcasters who, frankly, some days want it one way and some days want it another. Now, I know as a journalist you would never accept that, but I'm afraid that is our experience. One day they want it and the next day they don't, and probably this particular case is going to allow people to come to some more mature judgments about it. We broadly say, until charged, we won't name.
And I'm just being reminded that during the Leveson inquiry, your view was that individuals who are the suspects or the subject of arrest when you get there or being sought when you arrived are not identified. There should be nothing, written nor visual accounts that allow that to happen.
Oh, that's our broad policy.
Well, certainly South Yorkshire rode a coach and horses through that, didn't they?
Well, that's our broad policy, and I'm sure...
They got it wrong, didn't they, Sir Ben?
I'm not going to comment on that. All I'm going to say is that South Yorkshire, I'm sure, have got a similar policy. What I have not a clue, nor frankly do any of us, is what negotiations took place before that event. Now, I know that they're going to the Home Affairs Select Committee on the 2nd of September, and I'm sure that will be exposed.
Wouldn't happen in the Met, would it?
Well, I'm not sure we're always in a position, Nick, to point the finger. We've had one or two errors of our own, so I'm not going to start pointing the finger at some colleagues in the north.
Just before we move on, I'm just being told by one of your colleagues, I think you actually said a 50% decrease in calls coming in. It's a 50% increase.
If I did,
that's right. One of your colleagues has just whispered in my ear, so it's a 50% increase is what's being reported. We move on to other matters. Clayton's in Forest Hill. I think we've got you now, Clayton. Go ahead.
Moving forward with Section 60, what procedure are you going to put in place for people who feel like they've been wrongfully stopped and searched?
Well, first of all, Clayton, if you know about Section 60 and the announcements that's been made this week by the Home Secretary, you know that since I've been in the Met, we've reduced it by about 95%. So it's a huge reduction. We do probably about 1-2 a week now, and they were running, for me, too often. So actually, the national strategy has come from what we've achieved in the Met by doing less, but arresting more people and arresting the right people. If people want to complain about that, and we've actually seen, during the same period, we've seen a reduction of about a half the number of complaints about our stop search, then they can, ring 101, make a complaint to the IPCC. There are mechanisms there for it. And then finally, you've probably seen in the press, we're rolling out our video cameras for our officers. So in 10 boroughs, we've got about 600 piece of kit out. Within the next 12 months, we'll have about 16,000 cameras out there. And in fact, the rest of my day is going to be spent looking at the capital budget, which is not the most exciting of days, but it will mean we can find some money to do this, which I think is very important and will hold us to account.
Clayton, quick response. He's answered it. All right, I can't give you any longer than that. I have to give that one to the Commissioner, who scored a complete hit there. Well done. Marion's in Finchley. You're on the radio, Marion. Go ahead.
Hello. Good morning, Sir Bernard.
Good morning, Marion.
I want to ask about bank and credit card fraud. I read yesterday in the paper that every minute 7 people are defrauded, but the figures don't show in the annual crime survey. Can you explain that to me? 4 million crimes not appearing in the annual crime survey.
It's quite right, and I think it's wrong. The main reason
what
for that...
What are you going to do about it then, Commissioner?
Well, the main reason for it, Marion, I mean, I don't... have you been a victim?
I've been an attempted victim 3 times.
Right.
I've resisted it, but friends have been defrauded, and I meet many people who've either been defrauded or attempts have been made on them.
This is a quick anecdote, but it will be quick. Every month I have a public meeting, and if people anywhere in London want to come to it, they can come and complain or celebrate the police. And one of the things I often ask in that room is how many people have been a victim of credit card fraud or electronic fraud. And quite often 3/4 of people in the room will put their hand up, and I then ask them, keep your hand up if you lost any money, because they get compensated. And as a result of being compensated, they often don't complain. So I think one of the big problems is there is so much compensation in this area. The banks don't want to reveal how much they lose. The credit card companies don't want to reveal sometimes how vulnerable they are. We aren't getting a proper count of the crime. So that, I think, is a real problem. And I think what it also means is people don't take care of their own kit. Sometimes we could all do more to protect ourselves. And we've seen whether insurance, if you look at insurance conditions, sometimes an insurance condition is put on, if only you keep your windows closed, you will get paid out, but if not, you won't. That makes a difference. So I think we've got to do something fundamentally different in the way that we compensate victims of crime, because then we'll get the right reports, then we'll invest the right resource into it. So I think it is a bit of a challenge.
Marion, quick response from you?
Two things. First of all, the victims of these scams where the people come round and collect the card from the house are often elderly women. There seems to be no statistics about that. I'm an elderly woman. Fortunately, I wasn't robbed. The other thing is, where is the money coming from for the compensation? Surely it is coming not from the banks, but from us, the taxpayers who are bailing out the banks and who suffer from low interest rates.
Well, you're probably right. Since 2008, fundamentally, it comes from the profits, I presume, of the organisation, and whichever bank it is. Essentially, the customers are paying, and one way or another, either through their accounts or through taxation. More recently, probably, as you say. So I think first, the other thing I'd just like to say is, I think we got a huge underreporting. That I think accounts for that 4 million you've mentioned. But we do investigate an awful lot of fraud, and we do make an awful lot of arrests. But it is quite complicated, and sometimes these cards are hiked, abroad, and then the money appears in another country. So it's not straightforward to intervene in, but we do make an awful lot of detections where we can.
But you say people should perhaps come forward and report this crime. 3.8 million people, or at least attempts of crime, haven't, and they're not on the records, they're not on the figures. Surely let's start by getting those in the crime figures.
Well, some are, but I think what you've got to also look at is sometimes it's not always clear whether it's a crime or it's a civil issue. When it's a crime, it's very clearly crimed. But I'm not going to sit here and try and say that there is no under-recording. I'm accepting straight away that there is a huge under-recording of it for various reasons. I've given one, but it's a big problem.
Marion, thank you. Darwin, it's 8:24, by the way. You're listening to Commissioner from the Metropolitan Police, Sir Bernard Hogan-Howe, here taking your calls. You've still got about 5 or 6 minutes if you're quick, although there's only one spare line. Darwin's in Barnet. You're through to the Commissioner. Go ahead, Darwin. Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. Good morning, Commissioner.
Morning, Darwin.
I came to your office last year where you helped us take part in a stop and search DVD, and I think that was a great highlight of my life because it allowed you as the Commissioner to actually get involved in youth activity. So I just wondered, do you have any strategies, any ideas on how best we can showcase positive police community working with young people in their community, especially with trust in police being so low amongst young people? Is there anything that you feel that we as community leaders or community youth workers can do to further champion the work that police officers are doing and showcasing the good work?
Well, first of all, Darwin, thanks for that opportunity. And if more people did what you did, which actually, get off their backsides and did some positive things, I think that would make it a better London. I'm grateful for what you did because you actually tried to point out what we're trying to do positively. We know we don't always get it right. We employ human beings, and sometimes they get angry with young people, and they equally get angry with our officers. So occasionally we do get it wrong. But I think what you were able to show is that we are worried about stop search. We've reduced it. We've given training to our officers to improve the way they do it. Not only their arrest rate has gone up, the complaints have come down, and the main thing is to do it with respect.
In terms that my listeners can understand, what are these changes that have been introduced then? How will that actually affect the citizens of London?
Well, first thing is we said it's okay to stop search. That's what the law says. But it's got to be targeted on the right people. So for me, if you're a robber and you get stop searched every day, I'm happy with that. That's your choice. You chose to keep going out, taking knives out, whatever, then we will stop search those people.
So what will end then, Commissioner? What will stop then with this new advice?
Well, what we've done overall is we've reduced the overall number. So it was running prior to 2011 about 1.2 million a year. That's stop search and stopping accounts. We've got that down to probably, I think it's about 40% of that. We've increased the number of arrests that come from them and the arrest rate. And we've also reduced a big thing that Don will know about that was worrying people, which is what's called disproportionality. If you're black, you're more likely to be stopped. Now, at the moment, if you're of an Asian appearance, you're as likely to be stopped as if you're white, so there's no difference. If you're a black guy, you are 2.4 times more likely. Now, that's come down, but it's not yet, parity. But then again, in some, we're targeting gangs. About 2/3 of the gang members are from minorities.
And certain sort of street crime, unfortunately, is perpetuated by a lot of young black males in some instances. Is that not true?
I'm not going to excuse it entirely, because I think there's still something we need to do there. But we've done an awful lot of training. We've said to our officers, this is how our best stop searches do it. They pick the right people, they do it with respect, and they can still end up with an arrest and end up with a positive outcome with the young person and the people who watch it. So they're the big changes. And, as I say, in the future, The fact we've got these video cameras means that I expect that officers film that encounter, and it will modify both behaviour. It'll modify the behaviour, think, of the young person. If it is a young person, stop searched. I'm sure it'll modify the behaviour of officers in a positive way.
Just lastly on this, I think you said there'll be 16,000 video cameras eventually out there. What's the archiving of that? How long does that last?
The idea is that if there is a criminal case, then it'll last as long as, we need to keep material for a criminal case. If there is no material on it, it's about 30 days.
And if I come up and want to... Is it on all the time, or does the police officer has to...
No, we did have a debate about that.
Yes.
And the debate was you keep it on all the time so you miss nothing.
Yes.
The problem is you also capture private conversation between colleagues.
If I know somebody, I don't want necessarily to be filmed.
Or, if I'm out on the street, and occasionally I go out on the street, if you're talking to a child or a parent and you're saying, by the way, I'm having to record this, I think that changes the nature of police, and we don't want to do that. So what we said is, if an officer is tasked to an event, he's going to do a stop search. If you know you're going to a burglary, suspect on or whatever, you expect to turn it on and then video the event. We think that's a reasonable compromise. If officers consistently forget to turn it on, then there would be a consequence. But I expect that officers will find it helpful. I have to say, I went out using one in Camden probably about 6 weeks ago now, and there's only one of the teams at Camden that's got this kit. They all genuinely were really enjoying it. And of course, the boss goes and everybody tells you it's wonderful. But so far as you can judge, I honestly believe they were. And the best piece of evidence, it's a good piece of kit for the police as well as the public. The colleagues on the other response blocks wanted it. So they talked to the colleagues, and they knew it provided more benefits than risks. And I just think it makes us accountable, and it will capture the dilemmas a police officer faces. So, right, we all sit in glorious isolation, and at 9 o'clock the following morning, you can't believe what they did. Yeah, well, we weren't there. We weren't facing that drunk. That person was spitting at you, that person who wasn't that compliant, and wasn't wanting to be arrested.
Right.
So I think it's going to bring a lot of that reality to our front rooms, which I think is a good thing.
We've got a couple of minutes. Let's try and rattle through two more if we can, Sir Bernard. Paul's in Southgate. Go ahead with your question, Paul.
Hello, good morning, Commissioner.
Hello, Paul.
Right, now Deborah Glass, who was IPCC, the head of IPCC for 10 years. Now, she stood down in March this year, and in 2012, she said that the IPCC was not fit for purpose. Now, the former Chief Constable of Northern Ireland also agreed with her on LBC in a phone-in programme. I'd like to know what you actually think if the IPCC are fit for purpose, your views.
Yeah, I think it is at the moment. I mean, as you know, they're going to go in a big change. They're getting a lot more resources, and they're going to be expected to do more work. So for the last year, they've been recruiting lots more people. So I think they're a good organisation trying hard to improve. I think everybody accepts they didn't have enough resources to do the job that they've got. They're remedying that, and I think they've got to be given a chance to succeed.
What do they need to do better then, Commissioner?
I think the first thing they needed was enough investigators. The second thing they needed to improve is the number who weren't ex-police officers. That's been a challenge from the beginning. When they set up, they didn't have enough investigators, so they took quite a few retired police officers. And I think genuinely probably done a good job. But of course, the perception is they're too close to the police. They're too understanding of the police. So they're in the process of resolving that. Then the third thing, I'm sure they will want to continue to improve the way they investigate, as do the police.
We've got time for one final question. David's in Rainham in Essex. Go ahead, David. You're through to Sir Bernard.
Oh, good morning, Bernard.
Hello, David.
May I first thank you for the hard work you and your colleagues are doing to keep this country safe in a very, very testing times. Sir Bernard, my question to you comes in three parts. Given the aggravating factors in this case that you've already outlined...
Which one, David?
Is this the James Foley? You're talking about Jihadi John?
Yes.
Yep, OK.
All right, thank you.
Yes, it is, Nick, yeah. My question to you comes in three parts, really, sir. Will the Americans be given a jurisdiction to conduct their own independent inquiry? Where will the eventual trial be held? And do you think it causes a conflict of interest, the fact that the Americans do not recognise the International Criminal Court in The Hague?
The last one's quite a complicated one, which probably even a lawyer will struggle with, but I'll do my best on the other two parts, David. First of all, I think we've got to establish the facts. I mean, one fact we know is that obviously the poor man who was murdered was an American citizen. We haven't yet established who did murder him. It may be a British citizen, but we can't be sure yet. That's got to be established. And that gives us, therefore, two possibilities. What can the American system do and what can the British system do? The third thing we've got to establish is where did it happen? So wherever it happened, there will be a jurisdiction too. And the fourth thing is, obviously, did it happen in the middle of a war zone, and in which case, did international law apply as well? Well, when we've established the facts, the lawyers will get to working. But it's very clear they're in a war zone, and it's very clear that people are very angry about what they've done. So over the next year or two, I'm sure that it will become clearer. But at the moment, I think we don't know enough facts. But those are the things that will be taken into account. The final point you make about should the Americans get involved in the International Criminal Court, I'm not really in a position to judge, but I know they obviously have made a choice not to get involved in that.
How many American investigators are in the UK at the moment?
Offhand, I don't know, Nick. I know that we do work hard with them all the time, so we're always exchanging officers, so I genuinely don't know.
But some have arrived since the beheading of the American journalist.
There will have been some, but that's not unusual.
Are they allowed to carry weapons?
No.
They can't bring their guns here?
No.
Okay. Lastly on this... how many other... We know that the journalist and the two journalists involved in this were American citizens. How many British people are being held captive by IS at the moment?
There has been speculation about that over the last year or two, and that's not always straightforward. It's not something we talk about an awful lot for obvious reasons. So there have been cases in the past where there have been hostages, but we don't speculate around that.
Are there currently British hostages?
We just don't speculate around it, Nick.
You can't give me a number?
We just don't speculate around it.
You've been listening to Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Sir Bernard Hogan-Howe. Let me finish by giving that number out again, which is connected to the final question. David, thank you for that question. If you have any information to do with anything that anyone that you fear could be on their way to Syria, could have been in any way indoctrinated, is on the verge of being indoctrinated, important number 0800 789 321, 0800 789 321, or ring 101. Commissioner, thank you for your time coming to LBC. Good luck to the men and women working with you combating this problem.
Thanks, Nick, and thanks for your time.
OK, Sir Bernard Hogan-Howe here on LBC. 8:34 News is next.
Metropolitan Police Commissioner Sir Bernard Hogan-Howe has told LBC more powers might be needed to deal with British fighters returning from